you so much to our in-house ice cream truck. In more ways than we can probably count, our lives have been very much affected and impacted in the past 20 plus years, shaped by the impact that cell phones have had on our lives. It's really just kind of crazy. And you think back even like to the early 2000s, lots of people in the early 2000s had a cell phone, but think about how limiting cell phone plans were at that point. I mean, for one thing, and like the teenagers now, they have no concept of this, but like you'd have a certain amount of time per month, a certain number of minutes, even a certain number of texts, or maybe you didn't even have texts at all. Like you could get, like for example, when I first came to Gate City, if you sent me a text, it would cost me 10 cents to get it, and then I would have to pay 10 cents to respond to you. And so that was in 2010. And so all of that has kind of changed. And so as these plans have changed, as technology has changed, for one thing, one of the things that began to happen is that more people were talking on the phone than used to be. Because years ago, the plans were so limited in terms of the number of minutes that they had on it. When you started to get more minutes, you're like, well, I can talk on the phone. And this came as a blessing and as a curse, because how many times, for example, have you been in the grocery store and you're trying to think, do I want the lima beans or the green beans? No, it's the corn. Anyway, so you are staring at the shelf trying to figure out what it is that you're trying to get, and all of a sudden you hear someone talking and you assume they're trying to talk to you about something. And you turn around only to see they've got a phone up to their ear. Oh, they're not talking to me. Even worse is when Bluetooth headsets showed up. That's when it really became bothersome, wasn't it? Because you've got somebody that they're just pushing their cart down the aisle, and they're just talking, and you think they're either crazy or they're talking to you, and they're on one of those blasted phones again. And so that's aggravating. But as plans have changed now, not only do we have unlimited talk, we tend to have unlimited data. How many times have you been in Walmart? Again, you're trying to figure out, do I want lima beans or green beans? And you hear someone talking, and as you hear that, you instinctively think, okay, hey, they're probably saying something to me, and so you turn, and it's not. There's no headset. In fact, they don't even have the phone up to the head. In fact, they're doing a video call, FaceTiming. Are they talking about groceries? No, they're talking about work. They're talking about God only knows what they're talking about, and just going on having this conversation with someone who is not there, and that is enormously frustrating. And I don't know how many times you have experienced something like this, or a scenario like that, where the thought in your mind was this: I'd like to say, just call them back. Wait till you get in the car. Like, call them at home. Why? Because I don't want to hear that. You're not saying anything that I am remotely interested in hearing about. I don't care about any of the stuff that you're talking about, and I don't want to be a part of the conversation. All right, so there's all these conversations that are going on, so many that we're just not interested in. I don't want to be a part of that, but let me ask you this. If somehow you were able to be in the grocery store and Jesus is talking to somebody, I realize it's a bizarre hypothetical, but if Jesus is talking to somebody and you could hear that, what would you do? I mean, I would hope you would not say, where's the ice cream sandwiches? You'd probably say, I'd like to hear what he's saying, because if Jesus is talking, he's probably saying something important. Now, the truth is, you're not going to be able to go to Walmart or any grocery store today, and you're not going to experience Jesus audibly speaking to someone. But what we do have in the pages of God's Word are a whole slew of conversations that Jesus had with people. And we're going to be looking at, starting today through Easter, a number of these conversations that I'm in a series called Overheard. And specifically in Luke's Gospel, we're going to be looking at these conversations that Jesus has with people, and we get to overhear that conversation. And hopefully those are conversations you want to pay attention to, because when Jesus talks, he says things that are of consequence. When Jesus speaks, he says things that actually matter. Today we're going to be looking at a conversation that Jesus had actually with two people that are involved in this, one more active than the other. And as he is talking to them, even though this phrase is not used, really this concept serves as the theme of what is going on in this interchange. And it's this theme of self-assessment and how it is that you view yourself. In fact, Jesus, I believe, has something to say to me. He has something to say to you, as he had something to say to people then, about how we view ourselves. What does he have to say? Well, let's listen in on the conversation that we find in Luke chapter 7. Luke chapter 7, starting with verse 36. There we read that one of the Pharisees invited him, that's Jesus, to eat with him. He entered the Pharisee's house, he reclined at the table, and a woman in the town who was a sinner found out that Jesus was reclining at the table in the Pharisee's house. She brought an alabaster jar of perfume and stood behind him at his feet, weeping, and began to wash his feet with her tears. She wiped his feet with her hair, kissing them and anointing them with the perfume. When the Pharisees who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, "This man, if he were a prophet, would know who and what kind of woman this is who is touching him. She's a sinner." And Jesus replied, "Simon, I've something to say to you." And he said, "Say it, teacher." A creditor had 2 debtors. One owed 500 denarii and the other 50. Since they could not pay it back, he graciously forgave them both. So which of them will love him more? And Simon, that's the Pharisee, he answers and says, "I suppose the one he forgave more." Jesus says, "You have judged correctly." Turning to the woman, he said to Simon, Do you see this woman? I entered your house, and you gave me no water for my feet, but she, with her tears, has washed my feet. She's wiped them with her hair. You gave me no kiss, but she hasn't stopped kissing my feet since I came in. You didn't anoint my head with olive oil, but she's anointed my feet with perfume. Therefore, I tell you, her sins have been forgiven. That's why she loved much. But the one who is forgiven little loves little. Then he said to her, "Your sins are forgiven." And those who were at the table with him began to say among themselves, "Who is this man who even forgives sins?" And he said to the woman, "Your faith has saved you. Go in peace." You don't see the words self-assessment in here. You don't see the phrase of viewing yourself. But in truth, that thought undergirds everything that occurs in this instance. And it really helps us answer the question as to what Jesus says to me, to you, what he said to Simon, what he says to this woman about how it is that we view ourselves. And the first thing I believe he communicates is this: your self-assessment will affect how you treat others. My self-assessment will affect how I treat others. All right, so we're fairly early in Luke's gospel, and the ministry of Jesus is getting into full swing, and he's got one of what are going to be many encounters with the Pharisees. And you hear Pharisees, sometimes you hear Sadducees. In fact, there's another Jewish sect that existed in the first century known as the Essenes. The Essenes were almost zealots, like crazy, staunch and conservative, just really zealous on the far right. On the far left, you had the Sadducees, and then you had the largest group, which was kind of in the middle, and they were the Pharisees. Now, saying that they were less zealous does not to say that these were easygoing people. These were people that took very, very seriously the whole concept of the Jewish law and abiding by rules and standards. And so this guy, that would have been true of him. Now, initially, we're not introduced to him by name. We come to know him as Simon. But Simon, this Pharisee, has invited Jesus into his home. Now, it's a big deal today to have somebody into your house, to invite someone over to your home for dinner. Not hugely consequential, but it does matter if someone brings you into their home. First century, this was a really big deal. This is a really big deal, and something that would occur with great frequency, and you are genuinely showing honor and value to someone by bringing them into your home. Now, the question is, why does this Pharisee, why does Simon do this? Now, there's so many times in conversations or encounters that Jesus has with the Pharisees, the intent seems to be on behalf of the Pharisees to somehow trick Jesus. Maybe they're going to get him to say something that they can twist. Maybe they can somehow ensnare him in something. It doesn't seem at all that is Simon's goal in having Jesus over to his home. It seems that his ultimate purpose in having Jesus there is he's trying to figure out who exactly is this guy. I'm not sure what category to put him in. I'm going to try to figure him out, and I'll have an up close and personal in my home and that'll really help me. So he invites Jesus over to dinner, and we're told that they are reclining at the table. Now, when we see the phrase reclining at the table, we think about Thanksgiving Day, right? Where you have gorged yourself like a tick. You've unbuttoned the top button, and you're like this. I don't know why that was funny. Anyway, that's what we think of reclining, but this reclining is very different because we think about reclining at the table in a chair. They wouldn't have been sitting in a chair. This would have been a low table, and you'd be sitting on the ground. And if you are going to be having a meal in someone's home, like there would be pillows and stuff around this table where you would be eating, and your head would be up here where the table portion is. Your feet would be back that way. You'd be kind of leaning on the side. So that's the reclining that's going on. Maybe they have already eaten. Maybe they have not. Maybe this is going on, but when it says they're reclining at the table, that's what is occurring. So it seems like there's conversation that's going on. We don't know exactly what they're talking about up until this point, but we are told as this goes on that there is this woman who shows up, and we know no detail apart from what we read here, how she gets into the home. Were they in a courtyard at the house where she had easy access? We don't know. But Jesus is there, Simon is there, Jesus has his feet stretched out this way, and context suggests his sandals are off, and this woman stands behind him, weeping, and begins to wash his feet with her hair, with her tears, wiping them with her hair. Now let's say, out of the gate, if you're sitting somewhere eating, and someone comes up and stands behind you, weeping, it's going to be a little strange. If you go to La Hacienda today after church and the server is standing behind you weeping, go ahead and ask for the check. All right? This is kind of unusual. Now this is kind of bizarre to me. As what we read there is occurring, it doesn't seem like everything stops. Now, certainly it would get your attention when someone begins to touch your feet. We tend to be ticklish, and just the nerve impulses would go, oh, so somebody's got my feet. But she's not stopped, and it's like immediately she begins doing this. Simon is seeing this, and we're told that he's thinking something that he does not verbalize. And what he is thinking is, this man, and again, he's trying to figure out Jesus. He says, this man, if he were a prophet, because I've wondered if he is. If he were a prophet, then he would know something. He would know who and what kind of woman this is. Now, we're told back in verse 37, this woman was a sinner from the town. Now, there's been a lot of speculation as to what this woman's sin was. Some have suggested she was a prostitute. That is entirely possible. Maybe she was just a very sexually immoral woman, and that was known to be the case. We don't really know. All we know is she's from the town, and everybody knows who this woman is, and they know about her based on her story. And it is an out-of-bounds story. And so he's thinking, as he sees this going on, sucking on a chicken wing, if he were a prophet, he would know who this is. And if he knew who this was, he would know what she's done, and he would say, get your hands off my feet. Do not be touching me. Now, Jesus calls the Pharisee at this point by name. He calls him Simon, and he starts with a parable. And a parable is nothing more than an illustration. It's trying to appeal to the listener then and today, their imagination. Get this straight in your mind. So Jesus says, hey, Simon, let me ask you this. Let's say you've got a guy who lends two people money. He lends them money that's measured in denarii, or a denarius was a standard coin, Roman coin, that was I guess what you'd probably call minimum wage back then. It's what you would earn typically for a day's work. So you've got one guy who has lent 50, so 50 days' work, and then you've got a guy who's lent 500 days worth of work. So a couple of months versus a couple of years worth of money they have been lent. Now, neither one of them could repay this. So they are both indebted, and they're both indebted to a degree that they can't pay. And Jesus says, hey, Simon, let me ask you this. If the creditor cancels the debt for both of them, which of these two loves more? And Simon says, well, probably the one that was forgiven more. Probably the one that was forgiven more. And Jesus says, you've judged correctly. Now, we'll finish the story in a second, but there's enough here that we need to pause to consider a couple of details. First of all, this Pharisee, he knows who this woman is. And he identifies her not because of her pedigree, not because of her location as to which neighborhood she lives in the town. He knows her. In fact, it seems that everybody knows her, and on what basis do they know her? They know her based on what she has done. I know this woman because of her story. And this Pharisee sees this woman. He identifies her by what she has done. And in his mind, based on what she has done, this is an untouchable. This is somebody I should have nothing to do with. Somebody that is, well, beneath me. He's troubled because he thinks it's strange that Jesus, if he is who and what he is seeming to present himself to be, he's allowing that woman who's done that stuff. She's touching him. Can't believe it. Why would the Pharisee have nothing to do with her? It has everything to do with how he views himself. Doesn't it? I wouldn't touch her. I wouldn't let her touch me because of what I am. He thinks he is elevated. He's a good rule follower. He's someone who takes God's law seriously. As such, he's up here, she's down here. The twain will never meet, and he would have nothing to do with her. You know, it's interesting, the older that we get, among the things that are true is that we have more pictures that exist of us. And there's a lot more pictures taken today. We talked about cell phones at the beginning, in part because cell phones have good cameras now. We're taking gobs of pictures. And it used to be, you know, if you had a film camera, you wouldn't take many pictures because, I mean, it was pay to play. If you want to take that picture, you got to pay to get that film developed to actually see what it looks like. And now you just take a picture and you can see, oh, let me take 10 more, right? And so there are so many pictures that exist of us. And the longer that time passes, the more pictures there are that exist of you. Now, whether the pictures that exist of you are in Google Photos or in some online catalog, or they are in shoe boxes printed out, maybe some of you have some photos that are on metal. You know who you are. Elsie. You've got some pictures, in all likelihood, that you're like, I hope nobody ever sees that one. Wish that one could just somehow disappear. There was a picture I showed you all back a number of months ago when I was in, I think, the 5th grade. It was the summer of that year. I'd gone to scout camp. My parents had come to see me, and it was hot, and they had brought KFC for me. And I'm sitting on the back of a pickup truck, and I've got my shirt off. I've got my knee-high scout socks on. Jelly rolls bounding over my shorts, and I'm sitting there eating a chicken breast. It's not a flattering photo. Philip in particular has greatly enjoyed discovering that photo. And in truth, I will say it is not at all a flattering picture. It is not at all one, honestly, that I'm really glad that even exists. But all of us have some pictures that you look back on, you're like, man, I can't believe. Look at my hair back then. Can you believe that? Look at that outfit. Holy cow, I cannot believe that. I wore that and I thought that I was something, and now I cannot believe that. And so we look back at all of these, and like, if I were to see some picture of you, or you were to see some picture of me in the past, then it may be that we might giggle a little bit, but I'll be honest with you, I'm not going to get too carried away with it. And maybe you wouldn't get too carried away with it either. You know why? Because there's some bad pictures of you. There's some stuff that you would hate for people to see. That's how you were. There's some stuff behind you that you wouldn't want people to see today. But I don't want to get too carried away with me laughing at you, because you may discover what's behind me. Listen, what I'm saying is that how we respond to people, and you know this to be true, this is not rocket science, that how you treat people is very much affected by how it is that you view yourself. And this Pharisee looked at himself, where I am right now, I kind of have my act together. I'm somebody who's a rule follower who takes this whole religious thing very seriously. I go to the temple all the time. I sacrifice. I do all that stuff. I engage in proper moral boundaries and pay attention to all that stuff. My act is together. This woman has had her just coloring outside the lines everywhere, everywhere. He doesn't want anything to do with her because he sees where he is now. And he is evaluating where she is in comparison to where he is now and says, yeah, I need to back off away from you. You and I need to realize that as followers of Christ, the longer it is that we walk with Him, the more it should be the case that we are increasingly becoming like Him. But never, ever, ever forget that there's some pictures in the drawer that we wouldn't want anybody to see. And there's part of a story of who we were and what we were doing and what characterized our life back then. And that means that I'm not a bit better than you are. I might be further down this road and becoming more like Christ than you are. You just got on the road. I've been on it for a while. But listen, we're in the same boat. We're in the same boat, and we all have got some pretty bad pictures of us sitting there with our belly out holding a chicken wing. So keep that in mind, because how it is that you view yourself, it's very much going to shape and how effect you treat others. But Jesus communicates something else, and that's this. Your self-assessment will shape how you feel about Jesus. Your self-assessment will absolutely shape how you feel about Jesus. Even though the text does not tell us this, I really believe that there is an encounter that occurs that we're not told about. Again, this is purely supposition on my part, but I believe that Jesus has had a conversation with this woman before that particular day. And I believe it is in response to that she shows up on this day. And that being said, Jesus has turned to this Pharisee and he says, all right, so the one who, he's just told Jesus, hey, the one who's been forgiven a great deal, I think that one probably will love more. And Jesus takes that illustration, that parable, and applies it to the circumstances at hand. And so he says, think through this with me. In fact, he says, look at this woman. You see her. And so he reviews for Simon. He says, so when I came here, and the fact that Jesus is in the home suggests that his sandals would have been removed. But the fact if you're walking around with sandals on unpaved ground, your feet are nasty, crusty, dirty. Everybody's feet are nasty, dusty, crusty. And so customarily, you would want to, if you're going to be a hospitable guest, you'd want to wash their feet. And Jesus says, I came here, you didn't give me... Not only did you not wash my feet, you didn't even offer me any water for my feet. I'm sitting here, I've got them stretched out, and look at all the junk that's on them. That happened on your watch. He said, but what did she do? It says that she came in, and she is sobbing, and her tears are sufficient that it's beginning to wash away some of the dirt on Jesus' feet. And that which is not, she is beginning to pour out perfume, which would have been insanely expensive in first century. You didn't give me any water for my feet. She's given me perfume. You wouldn't give me a towel to wipe them, but she's taking her hair and wiping my feet with her hair. It was customary also in the first century that not some passionate kiss on the mouth, but you'd kiss somebody on the cheek. And he said, when I came in, you didn't give me a kiss at all, but you didn't kiss my cheek. But have you noticed? She's kissing my feet. My dirty feet. She's been kissing them. You wouldn't even kiss my cheek. As a sign of honor, one of the things that sometimes you would do is to put oil on someone's head. And Jesus says, I want you to pay attention to this. You didn't put oil, olive oil, common, cheap. You didn't put that on my head. But she's taken perfume and put it on my feet. So I'm telling you, her many sins have been forgiven. And that's why she loves much. Do not be mistaken, and don't let me lead you astray at all by this. This woman does not have her sins forgiven because of wiping feet and dousing perfume. This woman does not have her multiplied sins forgiven because she is dripping with tears. Jesus tells us why her sins have been forgiven, and it is because of her faith. The people of God have always, and will always be the people of God by faith. Nevertheless, and this is part of the reason I believe that there's this conversation that has taken place before this particular encounter. My estimation is that Jesus has encountered this woman. He has confronted her with these are the pictures of you that exist. This is the story of your life, and it doesn't have to be that way anymore. You've been stuck in this life, and I'm offering you a different life. I'm offering you new life as a follower of me. And this woman who had been an outcast by anybody that would ever go to the temple, anybody that would ever go to the synagogue, anybody that would ever have anything to do with God, they had nothing to do with her. But Jesus is saying, wait a minute, you can have a relationship with God, and you can have a relationship with God through me. I'm inviting you. I'm not avoiding you. I'm inviting you to be one of my followers. I'm inviting you to experience forgiveness by believing in me. And she does. She does. And I believe it is that experience of forgiveness that motivated her to show up. Probably she's been looking to find Jesus. Where is he? I am so grateful for what he's done for me. And she demonstrates her profound honor, her profound gratitude, and profound love. I really believe sincerely that there is an inextricable link between love and value. I don't necessarily mean that the extent to which you love someone is linked only to what you get in relationship with them, but I believe it is linked to the value you see them as possessing because of your connection, because of your relationship with them. This woman is acting sincerely out of real love, but it is love motivated by this enormous value that she has come to see that Jesus has. Jesus is a forgiver of sins. Jesus is not a turner away of people. He's someone that says, your sins, though they are many, are forgiven. Good night. He's someone that doesn't look down his nose at people who are sinners. He's not someone who gets away from me. Instead, he's someone who says, I forgive you. This Pharisee does not perceive Jesus the same way. Why? Because I do not believe, at least at this point, he sees Jesus as actually having any value. Why? I believe he thinks my act is together. My I's are dotted, my T's are crossed, I'm coloring inside the lines. What does Jesus have? What does he bring me? What value does he add? There's no value add. I don't know if you're aware of this. Some of you may be. I had to look it up, so don't think I'm crazy with this. But in 2019, Dress Barn closed its 650 stores across the country. Dress Barn shuttered its stores, 650 of them. Again, I had to look that up. And I had to look it up because, in truth, I don't really know anything about dress barn. I'm familiar with the concept of barns, being raised in one, but I'm not a great deal about dresses from the dress barn. You know, whenever it was that they closed, I didn't lose a moment's sleep. Not anxious a bit. In fact, didn't give it a second thought. You know why? Dress barn doesn't matter to me. It has no value to me. It never did. It doesn't now. So I am therefore indifferent to it. It's seemingly that same indifference that the Pharisee apparently has towards Jesus, because what Jesus brings to the table, he doesn't view himself as actually needing. Again, his self-assessment, he views himself, got my act together. I don't really need Jesus. I don't really feel anything for him. Now, there are many, certainly, in this community and billions around the world who do not walk, who do not know, and do not have a relationship with Christ, and absolutely would say, hey, I don't know him, much less love him. But it's precisely, at least those that are familiar with the stories of Jesus, it is precisely because they do not view themselves, how they have assessed themselves, is as one who doesn't really have need of anything. They don't really have a problem. On the flip side, there are those who've been forgiven, who have come to know and follow Jesus. And perhaps there's a time where some of you could say, I can see myself as that woman. I had a story, and there were people that shunned me and would have nothing to do with me, and that I was an absolute mess, and Jesus forgave me, and I came to know him, and he changed my life, and that's wonderful. Some of you still feel that gratitude, but there are others who have experienced that. You've gotten further along in the process of following Jesus, and your life looks a lot more different. Consequently, I think there are many who came to faith in Jesus that get to the point that feel effective indifference to Jesus because they don't think he's bringing anything to the table now. Oh, he did back when he saved me, but I'm good. I'm good. Not perfect, but I'm good. I'm good. I'm good enough. And so how you feel about Jesus? Well, love is not really the word. Let me ask you today a couple of questions that will help you think through everything that we've talked about. How you treated, how you viewed, how you spoke to people, or even if you would speak to some people this past week, all of that says something about how you view yourself. So what does it say? Does it say, I am better? On the flip side, does it say, I am of no value? If the answer is anything other than something like this, I'm a follower of Christ, a work in progress, further down the road than some, not as far as others, but a work in progress just like them, your self-assessment is skewed. It's out of balance. Let me ask you a follow-up question. If somehow you were able to physically see Jesus, he appeared to you today. You walked with him by faith. You believed that he existed. But to actually see him, what would you say? What would you say? Would it be, I am so grateful for you and I love you so much. Thank you so much for loving me. Or would it be more like, hello, Jesus. Nice to finally see and meet you. Listen, your answer to that question says something about how you view yourself. And that has shaped how you feel about him. We got to listen in on a conversation here. But I believe as Jesus was speaking to Simon, so too today he's speaking to us. So the question is, what's he saying to you. Will you bow your heads with me?